Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. I will interject, if you have just arrived and are looking for a seat, there are a few located just over in this corner here, and there is an aisle in the middle. Rest assured, you will also not walk in front of any cameras, so you are good to go. I'm so delighted to welcome so many people here, both live and virtually, to the launch of The Russian Daughter, the latest novel from Sarah Klassen. This is an incredible turnout, and we're all so very grateful to you for spending your evening here with us. This evening will feature a reading, a conversation hosted by Faith Johnston, the opportunity to ask some questions, and then we'll move along to the book signing. I'll offer some exciting details about book signing procedure at the close of the event. The only thing I will point out at the beginning is that we will ask you all just to stay in your place when the event is over so we can safely transport Sarah to the signing table just beside the cash desk. I'll then let you know when she's situated and you may join us to have your books signed. The other thing I will point out is that during the Q&A, there'll be an opportunity, naturally, for you folks to all ask questions. I will, once you put up your hand, I'll approach you with this wireless microphone. And please know this is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that those folks joining us and watching at home will be able to hear the question and prevents us from having to repeat it and take up more of your valuable questioning time. That's it for me right now. Oh, it is not, because I will point out that all of you watching online, you also have the opportunity to ask questions. If you just write them into the chat, along with any other comments you might have for Sarah, we'll be sure to pass those along at the end of the event. That is it. But now I have the inestimable pleasure of introducing the person who will introduce tonight's participants. That, of course, is Sue Sorensen. Sue is the Associate Professor of English at Canadian Mennonite University. She is the award-winning author of the exceptional novel, A Large Harmonium, the book The Caller. Yes, that is worth applauding. The Caller, Reading Christian Ministry in Fiction, Television, and Film, and she was the editor of the 2008 publication West of Eden, Essays on Canadian Prairie Literature. Forthcoming this year is the poetry collection Acutely Life, which will be out through CMU Press, so please do watch out for that. Appropriately enough, Sue also serves as general editor at CMU Press, one of the key reasons she is gracing our stage this evening to introduce our participants. Please join me in welcoming Sue Sorensen.
It's always so much fun to hear what John is going to say about people. Along with every single person in the Manitoba literary community, I'm grateful to McNally Robinson and to John Taves for all that they do. It's really quite incredible. So I'm very pleased this evening to welcome you to this event in celebration of the latest book from CMU Press, The Russian Daughter by Sarah Klassen. It's been an honor to be the publisher of this new novel by Sarah, and additionally, I served as the book's editor. So I've been working closely with her for the past year, which has been quite delightful and not like work at all. Once we got through the pretty strenuous contract negotiations, she's tough. For those of you who don't know about CMU Press, we are a small academic publisher at Canadian Mennonite University. And I'd like to put in a tiny plug for our university. Please send us your young people. We could handle a few more students, and the pandemic, yes, has been hard on every organization and every person, but I need to say that small liberal arts universities, even excellent ones like ours, have been especially hard hit, so send us your young people. They will enjoy themselves. I hardly need to say anything about Faith or Sarah to this crowd. Many of you would know them very well indeed. My introduction to Sarah was, I think, about 15 years ago when she agreed to be a creative writing instructor alongside Rudy Wiebe at the School of Writing at CMU, which I ran for 5 years starting in 2007. That first year, she and Rudy, who are both alumni of the predecessor colleges of CMU, volunteered their time to teach creative writing. And I can distinctly recall how honored the writers felt to be learning from Sarah and Rudy, as did I. The experience of being Sarah's editor has been lovely. I found her to be amenable to many of my suggestions and amiable, stubborn when she was not. As with many authors, she was quite protective of her characters, and I knew I was deep inside the project when I also became protective of them. This is a historical novel, so there was some fact-checking to do, but for the most part, we agreed that this is first and foremost a novel. These characters and their idiosyncrasies, their assets and liabilities, their hard decisions, it's the characters that matter. Sarah and I think, are both particularly loyal to Sofia, whom I decided apparently to call surprising and defiant on the back cover. Sofia is the Russian daughter. In the first version of this book, the title was The Daughter from Kharkov or Kharkiv. And Sofia, this adopted Russian baby in a Mennonite village, is not easy to love, but I love her and I hope you do too. Fairly early on, I said to Sarah, okay, these people who adopt the Russian baby, they're clearly Mennonites, but you don't say so. I don't think the word Mennonite appeared in the first version of this manuscript. I thought we needed to say the word, but not too much. So now this word does assert that the characters, most of the characters are Mennonite, but we didn't want to overdo it because this is a story of family and war and friendship and hardship and strained loyalties, and none of these things belong just to Mennonites, of course. A word about the cover, just in case you're wondering about it. I wanted an appropriate photograph of the era, about 1920 on the cover. And this past year, there was a very fine exhibition of Mennonite historical photographs called Mennonite Village Photography. This book is edited by Dr. Susie Fisher, and she curated the show, which was on our campus. And I know that McNally Robinson can order this for you. I don't think they have it in stock, but I know they can order it for you. Wonderful collection of early Manitoba Mennonite photographs. And we found one that I thought worked quite nicely. I worked closely on the cover with Judith Rumpel-Smucker as designer, and I wouldn't mind if Judith just stood up and gave a little wave. My thanks to her for being a good friend and a good designer. And my thanks to the Mennonite Heritage Archives at CMU, where this photograph resides. We wanted it to keep it a little bit mysterious, so you've got half of a woman on the cover. Okay, here are the introductions, the official introductions about Sarah Klassen. Many of you know Sarah best as a poet. That was my introduction to her a number of years ago, starting in the 1980s. Sarah has published between then and now 8 very fine collections of poetry, among them Violence and Mercy, Simone Weil, Songs for Hunger and Love, and my favorite, A Curious Beatitude. Her most recent poetry collection from Turnstone in 2020 is The Tree of Life. In 2000, Sarah published her first book of short stories, The Peony Season, and this now will be her 4th book of fiction, either short stories or a novel. So with this, The Russian Daughter, she is the author of 12 books. Later this year, CMU Press will publish her 13th book, Selected and New Poems, in our brand new lyric series honoring notable Mennonite poets. Sarah, for many years, taught English here in Winnipeg and is now retired. Oh, I can't read my own notes. After Sarah reads from The Russian Daughter, she'll have a seat and be in conversation with Faith Johnston. Faith is a retired teacher. She's originally from Shoal Lake, Manitoba. She is the author of A Great Restlessness, which is a biography of Doris Nielsen, the first communist to sit as a Canadian member of parliament. Her other books include the novel The Only Man in the World, published by Turnstone, And I'm grateful that Faith will be here in a few moments after Sarah does her reading to help us celebrate and talk about the Russian daughter. So that's it from me. So dear friends, please help me welcome and congratulate Sarah Klassen.
Good evening, everybody. Everybody I can see, and those of you who I can't see. I'm really thrilled to see all of you here. Overwhelmed would be a suitable word to use. I know that some of you have been here in launch after launch after launch for my books, and I don't take that for granted. I'm very grateful and I feel very humbled by your loyalty and your interest in my writing. Before I read from my novel, I would like to thank, first of all, CMU Press for the care they took with my book. Every detail was taken care of, and we, as a result, have this very nice looking book that Sue so thoroughly introduced. Thank you to Sue for her good comments and her good advice, which guided this book and made it a better and a shorter novel. Thank you also very much to McNally Robinson for hosting these events, and for John Taves, who takes good care of everything. I'm going to read two short sections from the novel. In the first section, you will be introduced to Amalia and Isaak Albrecht. They are a farming couple in a small village, and they have no children. And this is a problem, especially for Amalia. A sheen of sadness clouded Amalia's eyes this morning when Isaak left for the fields. That sadness pursued him as he guided the horses and turned to watch the wheat fall in yellow swaths behind the mower. The sadness is still with him when he returns home and calls for Kolya to unhitch the horses. Give them a good rub down, he says. With Gogol sniffing and slobbering at his heels, Isaak Albrecht makes his way through a yard bustling with variously colored fowl. He detours around a standoff between a rooster and a gander, nudges aside with his hard boot a pair of foraging ducks, and narrowly misses stepping on a stray chick. The hissing, squawking, clucking that greet him are a joyful noise, an assurance that all is as it should be. If only Amalia had been able to smile this morning. Isaak leaves the feathered population behind, and when he nears the house, he hears voices. 3 women are drinking tea at a small table set up in the shade of an oak. Their chatter floats toward him like the twitter of birds. He pauses to watch the women lift their teacups, turn to each other, smile, and nod as they speak. The plump woman with 2 toddlers at her knee and a baby, a boy, in her lap is Nettie Edgar from across the street. Her face is round and glowing as if she possesses more happiness than she can contain. Isaak allows his eyes to linger on that happy face, but not too far below. The woman with the graying hair and brown shawl is Hulda Geddert, the village midwife. Hulda attended 2 births yesterday, Amalia told Isaak this morning. Hulda has given birth to 11 children of her own, all alive, all healthy, and too grown up to play at her knee. By the time the 4th was born, she was known as a reliable and skillful midwife. Her services needed in the village, and the gossip she carried from yard to yard, always welcome. Her services have not been needed in the home of Isaak and Amalia Albrecht. Amalia is the third woman at the table. She's pouring tea and offering the schnetje she was baking this morning when Isaak left for the fields. A gust of wind ripples the white cloth spread over the small table, lifts the lace collar of Amalia's print dress, and plays with her hair. When the women notice Isaak, they call out greetings. He lifts his cap and raises a hand in return, but he doesn't join them. Instead, he goes into the house where it's cool and quiet. The Albrecht home, childless, is usually quiet. Neither Isaak nor his wife are loquacious, and both prefer small groups, like his wife's tea party under the oak tree, to large gatherings. Isaak removes his boots before he enters the living room, shooing Mitzi down from the Schlafbank, the bench that can be pulled out to become a bed for children or guests. It's rarely needed. The lack of children troubles Isaak troubles him more than news from St. Petersburg. It troubles his wife even more. He can hear her now calling Luda from the kitchen to take the tea things back into the house. Luda, a teenager from one of the nearby Russian villages, comes every day to help Amalia in the kitchen and in the garden. Isaak goes to the window and watches the easy movements of her lithe body, the body of a girl in the process of becoming a woman. He turns away. And what did Hulda have to say? Isaak asks at supper. He's been out in the sun all day, his skin burned brown. Work has not exhausted him. He's young and strong and starved. He eats his fill of varenika and cream sauce and smoked sausage fried to perfection. He spreads plum jam on a slice of bread to eat with his coffee. Over supper, he has spoken of the wheat harvest, the heads full and heavy, the yield even greater than expected. Kolya says he wants to work in the fields, Isaak tells his wife, who has not replied to his question. I told him no. Who would look after the sheep and cows? Amalia, even quieter than usual tonight, has listened, but neither rejoiced over a good crop nor asked if Isaak knows whether Kolya, who sleeps in the hayloft, really is 12 years old as he claims to be. She picks up her fork and taps the tablecloth with it lightly, not ready yet to speak. Come, Amalia, you can't mean that Hulda had nothing to say. No stories? Isaak wants to draw his wife out of herself and into the conversation. He wants to reach for her hand. Amalia stares at her fork. Hulda had information. Isaac's cup is still half full. He spreads another slice of bread with jam and waits for his wife to tell him more. A girl in Kharkov. She turns the fork in her hand. Another kitchen girl? And from Kharkov? No, we have Luda. What else do we need? I'm very satisfied with Luda. Aren't you? Amalia, just tell me. Don't give it to me bit by bit as if you're feeding a baby. He shouldn't have said it like that. He has jabbed his finger into the wound Amalia is unable to conceal. She's pregnant. What, Luda? No, Isaak, not Luda. Who then? The girl in Kharkov. Puzzled, Isaak waits for Amalia to explain, but his wife is silent. He reaches for her hand, strokes it gently, patiently, until a realization dawns. The pregnant girl in Kharkov, a girl he doesn't know, has never seen or heard of, finds herself in a dilemma from which he and Amalia, have the power to rescue her. Put another way, the girl in Kharkov has a solution to a problem the Albrechts have been unable to solve. When Amalia is ready to speak, she explains in a voice scarcely more than a whisper, but very urgent, that the girl's family has declared their home is out of bounds to a child without a proper father. Someone must be found to provide a home for it. Why couldn't that be our home? Amalia says. Huldah thinks it could. Well, she didn't say it in so many words, but the look she gave me made her meaning clear. Now Isaak is a speechless one. He lets go Amalia's hand and avoids her eyes, which are lit with a shimmer of hope. He looks down into his cup. Amalia rises to clear the table. A mirror hangs near the door to the bedroom, and beside the mirror, a framed photograph of Alexandra, Empress of Russia. Amalia stops in front of her. She feels sorry for the handsome woman with stern eyes. Alexandra is German, and the people don't like her. Amalia turns from the picture to study her own face in the mirror. Brown eyes with a hint of green, waves of thick auburn hair. Every morning she brushes it, pulls it back firmly, twists it into a figure 8 in the nape of her neck, and fastens it with pins. By noon, vagrant strands have escaped and form a tousled frame around her face, a face with fine features and skin that is smoother, creamier than most village women can boast. She's younger than the Tsarina and prettier, but Alexandra is the one with children. She has given the Tsar 4 daughters, and now they say she will give birth again. The Tsar wants a son. The troubled country needs an heir. And now fast forward for another scene in the same house, but this time the Albrechts have acquired 3 adopted children. And so this is a winter scene, and the family is at home with the smallest children, and they are awaiting the homecoming of the older daughter who is at a boarding school, who is attending a boarding school. As the season of the Nativity approaches, the village of Friedenthal, if it could be seen from above, would present a serene picture of white roofs and freshly fallen snow wedged against shrubs and buildings and picket fences. A picturesque village beyond the reach of death and destruction. Inside the farm homes, there's a bustle of cleaning, cooking, baking. In the Albrecht kitchen, Amalia is making plumamos and watching Masha take sheets of cookies from the oven. Neighbor Thielman left for Barbenkova 3 days ago. When he returns, he will bring Sofia. The twins, who will soon be home from school, will explode with excitement. One morning after breakfast, Hannah announced that the minute she sees her sister, she will ask, "Why didn't you write me a letter?" Boris says he will show her the pigs. He helps his father and Kolya clean the animal stalls and pig pens with extra rigor, as if the barn too must be prepared for the nativity. Stirring the plumamos, Amalia, like Hannah, wonders why Sofia did not answer her letter. She conjures the scene of her daughter's homecoming. Sofia will step from the droshka, and even though she did not answer her mother's letter, Amalia will smile and rush toward her. She will embrace her daughter, and her daughter, even if she won't return the embrace, will at least allow it. Some of what Amalia imagined happens. Sofia steps down from the droshka, and Amalia smiles, rushes forward, her arms reaching out to embrace the small girl in the large winter coat. She submits to her mother's hug, but her arms are hung with bags of various sizes, and she cannot raise them to return the embrace. Amalia releases her daughter and relieves her of her load. After an outburst of "Sofia, Sofia," Hannah remembers her question. "Why didn't you write to me?" Before there can be an answer, Boris breaks in. "I'm going to show you the pigs." Isaak embraces his daughter cautiously. "Did you travel well?" "It was snowing," Sofia says, "the whole way. You can't imagine how white and soft the world became. I watched, and it was so beautiful. It was like a dream. And sometimes I fell asleep. She speaks softly, slowly, like someone who stands at a distance. Amalia doesn't know what to say to this. Isaak looks as if he's facing a stranger, and the twins simply stare. Amalia conceals her alarm at the amount of Sofia's luggage by carrying some of it into the house, then returning to the task of preparing dinner. During the meal, the children, while ravenously conveying food from plate to mouth, vie to tell their sister every detail about school, where they've learned new songs and a funny dialogue for Christmas. Sofia listens, a dreamy smile on her face. Boris puts down his fork. Why is Sofia so white? He asks. When no one speaks, Sofia, who really is pale, says, it's a long way from Barvenkova. I'm tired. That night, when everyone is in bed, Amalia turns to Isaak. Why did she bring all her things? And why is she so pale? From traveling, I suppose. Let her be. She'll tell us when she's ready. There's no need for us to worry Amalia. But Amalia fears there is. Thank you.
I want to say how impressed I am with 12 books, and I've read most of them. And it's an honor to be here. And we've had a little conversation on the phone before this event. And there's certain things that I know that Sarah wants to talk about and certain questions that I want to ask. But I'm so impressed, Sarah, that you were so productive during the pandemic. I think some of us weren't, but you definitely were. So if you could just say a few words about some of the projects you were engaged in, apart from finishing this book.
Well, I didn't suffer during the pandemic, I have to say. It was under new circumstances. That's good. There were new circumstances, so it required new schedules. And I felt that to do something productive was a good thing to do. And one of my nieces gave me a book called Successful Aging. One of the things the book suggested was try something new. So one of the things I did, I set myself the task of drawing a picture nearly every day. And I enjoy doing that very much, walking every day. And because of the technology that we all learned during the pandemic, there was another project I was able to participate in. It was a collaborative project, which was good because during the pandemic, you didn't see as many people of the writing community. But with my two poet friends, Joanne Epp and Sally Ito, we've been busy translating the poetry of a 17th century Austrian woman. And so we had the task of, I think we met pretty much every week on Zoom. And that meant there was a job to be done before that, right? Mm-hmm. So this kept us engaged. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think that was good. And I think some of these other activities, no doubt, interfered with the writing of The Russian Daughter and probably slowed down the completion of it. But it got done. I was doing, I think, if I remember correctly, I was doing most revisions most of the time.
Wow. Yes, well, it's done. It's amazing. And the interesting thing to me, I read first an electronic version because I happened to be in Vancouver. But anyway, I didn't read the acknowledgements until I got to the end of the book. And normally I read them earlier than that. And it was so interesting to me, Sarah, that this story, the germ for this story was a story your mother told you about an adopted Russian daughter. And I would like to ask you about your mother and about her life in the Ukraine, and also about the story she told you.
Yes, my mother grew up in Ukraine, but it was the Mennonites called it Russia. They didn't call it Ukraine, not the people who came over Canada at that time. So my mother lived in Russia. She did not suffer extremely. She didn't suffer violence or rape or any of the things that many women suffered, but there were sad things in her life, and there was loss, and she brought that with her to Canada. And she was in her early 20s when she arrived, and then when she married, for a while she lived in the Interlake. And in those circumstances, she had very little time for leisure and very little time for forming close friendships. But she had a great deal of need to tell stories, I think. She wanted to talk to people about what she'd experienced. This was important to her. So then she turned to me. I was her audience. I was not a very good audience. I didn't want to hear those stories. That was Russia, and I was going to be Canadian. And so I didn't, but eventually I grew older and gained a little more sense and realized that these stories were valuable. When in my first, one of the stories she repeated over and over and over was the story about the journey they took to Yalta, which I responded to in my very first book. And but there were other stories as well. And in my first novel, The Wittenbergs, I found a way of embedding those stories that my mother told me in that novel. And at the time, I read a book by Rosemary Sullivan about Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood was commenting on her novel, The Cat's Eye, which has, it's a story about young girls in Toronto. And she says, and I found this so interesting, that in reading that novel, she said, I was looking for a literary home for the things of childhood. And I think I've been doing that to honor my mother.
They're powerful. Somehow things you absorb in your childhood, they are powerful, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
To recall them.
Yeah. And it was important for her to have, she had a poor audience, me at that time. So, but she needed to speak about those things, I believe. Yeah. And this particular.
This was one of the stories. But you don't want to elaborate more.
Well, I
okay.
can say, yes, it was a story. This one she told me when I was an adult.
Okay.
It was many, many years later. And I found the story extremely dramatic. And I wondered why she had never told me this story before. And I'm not sure. And I don't think she ever mentioned it again. But it was, in fact, a story of her aunt and her uncle. And they were farmers in a village, and they were doing well, but they didn't have children. And so they decided to adopt, and they adopted two girls. Both adoptions ended badly. And when the Mennonites started to emigrate to Canada after the revolution, they decided to go. And by that time, the first girl they had adopted was no longer living. And the second one refused to come with them. So they arrived in Manitoba, and they still didn't have a family.
Wow. She's not telling you the story of the novel, though, because she developed it in her own way, as some of you know already. And that is the next question I wanted to ask you. What were some of the challenges you faced taking this germ of a story and developing it into a novel?
Well, I had to come face to face with mistakes that I made in the initial story. The initial story was much, much longer. And as I started out, the story was about Amalia Albrecht. She was going to be the main character. And
was she the mother?
The mother in the story, Amalia, yes.
Yes.
So she was the main character, and the desires of her heart were going to be at the center of the story. And then, but when I was thinking of my mother's story, when she told it to me, it was so dramatic. I thought, this is going to be so easy. All I need to do is write this down and then work with the characters, and it'll be a story. But I was too glued to the initial story to begin with, because a ways into the novel, the first Sofia, the character, who at that time was called Elizabeth, I think, and she is murdered. So she's gone. Mm-hmm. So I showed this story to a couple of friends, and they said, "You killed her?" They were just getting interested in this story, in this girl, and now she was no longer there. Why did I do that? And so this was a challenge for me, and of course they were right. And I realized that I was thinking of the wrong person as the main character, and it became Sofia's story. And
interesting.
I did not kill her. So, and I think another challenge for me was the fact that there were so many scenes with children. This is a book for adults, and I'm thinking, how do I make this interesting for the adults when there are so many children, scenes with children? So I found that to be a challenge. Yes.
I don't know. I'm so interested in children. as an old lady, I'm so interested in children. They delight me so much. But I can see it could be a challenge for a writer. This is so interesting. First, to hear that you weren't interested in your mother's stories when you were young because you wanted to be Canadian. Mm-hmm. And it's related in a way to the adopted daughter who doesn't fit in. And I mean, this desire to fit in, this desire of children to really fit in, that comes across so strongly here. And it's so true. Yes, I from my own experience as well, I've run into that it's so important if you've immigrated from somewhere else, but that your children are not interested. In fact, they reject the language, they reject everything they can because they want to fit in. But you speak German. Yes, of course.
Yeah, and then I think another challenge was the ending, because my initial novel was much, much longer. Mm-hmm. And again, it sort of had a part two where they all come to emigrate. But that was a bad choice too.
So you left that part.
Yeah.
You may keep the script and write another book. Another thing, I think I will ask one more question, and I missed it. That. I was so interested in this. In this book, the Russians are not all the bad guys, and I think that was very interesting. There are a number of connections, and of course, I knew a little bit about this history, but not a lot. So Russians are often servants at the central school that several of the children attend. They learn from Russians. They learn Russian literature, Russian language. They actually have some Russian teachers. And at one point in the novel, there is a Russian officer billeted with the Albrecht family. And they're all nuanced portraits. And I wondered if you were doing this deliberately. Are you deliberately doing this in your book, or?
Yeah, I think I certainly didn't want to stereotype them as a certain kind of people, so that there were the ones who were the servants in the homes, and the characters in the story have to relate to these people, and they don't always want to do that. And some of them aren't very gracious about it, but I think that the Mennonites always lived sort of privileged lives in connection with people of the villages, certainly. And the idea of lands, I was just noticing the first bit I read today, the word fields was repeated so often. The fields of land are so important to the people, to the Mennonite farmers there. And it was also important to the people from the villages, because Kolya, one of the first things is that I read, he wanted to work in the fields. And I think later in the story, somebody is talking to him and he says about his village, what is his village like? And he says, well, they would like land.
The village was portrayed in a very real way to me too. And it's very different than the villages I remember in Manitoba. And I come from a small village where the farmers lived on their farms out of the village, and they came to the village on Saturday night. That was the pattern in most towns in Manitoba. But in this town, the farmers live in the town. Their barns are part of their property.
Well, it's not really a town, it's a village.
It's a village.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And this isn't, you know this from your own studies. You know what these villages were like.
Well, I've done a fair bit of reading about them, yes.
Yes, that was very interesting to me. So I have another question about your own time spent in the Ukraine. Some of you may know that Sarah has gone to the Ukraine at least 3 times, taught twice there, and you took a heritage tour. And did this influence your writing of the novel?
I'm not sure, because the villages such as the one that I describe in this book, those villages are gone. They were gone. And so it was really a very different. It was interesting to me because I was, I read about these places, but what I saw was very different. It was gone. And I don't think it have influenced it that much. But I was, there were still some vestiges of Mennonite architecture here and there. But and what I found interesting was the fields. Some areas look very much like Manitoba, like the large fields of sunflowers, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah, but as far, I don't know whether it made, whether I made any changes in my book on that account. Now that the war is going on in that very part of the country, 100 years later, they are suffering, and we hear all about it. And I think about those people, and I think about the students I had in the city of Kharkiv. And and I wonder, like, who's Ukrainian and who's Russian.
Yes.
So
Right. It's so near the border. There's probably a lot of Russians as well as Ukrainians.
yeah, I think so.
I think now we open it up, and I know some of you have already read the book, and even if you haven't, you may have questions. And I think
we'll
John will take you a microphone.
Yes, indeed. I will run over to you, Phil Donahue style, if you do put up your hand. Also, if you're watching online, feel free to just write your question in the chat. We have around 10 minutes for questions. Oh, yes.
there's kind of a mystery at the end. I don't know whether Sofia left Russia or didn't, because she didn't go to Moscow. She went to Kharkov. So is that deliberate, or? I hope I'm not giving something away that I shouldn't.
Maybe that's left up to the reader. Do you want her to read?
I was
Did you want
annoyed
her to?
about it. I wanted her to,
Yeah.
I wanted the answer.
Oh, I thought she did. I
wondered.
thought she did. Yes, I thought
was
this was.
disappointed that she didn't, but then I thought, well, maybe she did, but she took a detour. I don't know.
I think so.
We have a question from Elsie, who's watching online, was wondering how long it took you to write this book, Sarah.
How long?
Yes.
A long time. I finished, I started it pretty soon after I finished writing the Wittenbergs. It was my first novel, and I was really writing poetry. And I thought, well, I've written a novel, so I'll go back to poetry. But then I thought, no, maybe I should do it at least one more time, because you learn something the first time. And so the Wittenbergs was published in 2012. So since then.
10 years, yes.
Absolutely. And Elsie had also commented on your beautiful reading, Sarah. And
Pardon me?
Elsie had also commented on your beautiful reading and wanted to congratulate you on your 12 books.
Thank you.
Hi there, I wanted to thank you as a younger person who didn't actually have family that told a lot of stories. I'm now trying to go back and learn about my great-grandparents and their migration stories. And so what I really appreciated was firstly hearing the female voice of that time and of the challenges. And I feel like you really highlighted and honored the challenges that existed at that time. And so I appreciated your honesty. So I wanted to thank you for that. And was curious, as you wrote, if you learned anything more about yourself and how, or about what you learned maybe through the process of writing Sofia's story.
About myself. Well, I think I explained that I found out that I made some very bad choices to begin with, and then I need to correct them. I learned that I enjoy the revision stage of writing, and I learned to admire good writers. I think with greater appreciation, because I realize what a gift they have and what it takes to write a really good book.
I know the general time period. Could you be specific? When, what year does the story start and when does it end?
The story, the novel. Yes, that's a very good question, because I think I have a disclaimer somewhere in the book that I have perhaps taken liberties with time and distances. It starts in the beginning of the century, say about 1905, 1906, round about then. And yeah.
And it goes to about 1923, I think.
And yeah, like when it ends in the early 1920s, I would say the emigrations, the desire to emigrate started in 1922, 23, 24, 25, roughly. Those are rough answers, and I'm being deliberately vague.
Lots of revolutions.
And were there any more questions at all?
So
I was wondering if you could comment, were there any writers that you felt particularly influenced this book, or were a model for you to use when you were writing this book, or do you not really pay attention to those kinds of things?
Were there any writers that particularly influenced you?
sorry.
Were there any writers that particularly influenced you, Sarah, in the writing of this book? Or is that something you didn't pay much attention to?
Influences,
Exactly, for this book.
writers, any
Are
writers?
the writers that influenced me? Well, I could say Hilary Mantel, but I mean, that's reaching really high. I mean, her historical novels are wonderful. I didn't particularly think of this myself as writing an historical novel, although I realize you can't ignore the Russian Revolution when you're writing a book set in that time. So I don't know, good books always I think influence one and influence me, but I can't think of any one particular book. Thank you for the question.
Will we ever have a book that you've written about your own life? Or are you not interested in publishing such a book?
About my
Your own life, the story of your own life.
my own life? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, will you ever write a book about your own life?
And I don't plan to write a memoir. I am at present though writing the story of my mother. It's a biography of my mother. I have finished a part of it, but it's not going to be published. It's just for my mother's grandchildren.
I don't, this is directly to Faith. I don't mean to embarrass you, but there's no such place as the Ukraine. It's a common mistake that people make.
You're not supposed to say that.
No, it's sort of like the Canada.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, I actually know a little bit about this. I don't remember where, but the Ukraine was the term that was used while it was still occupied by the USSR. So right now, the Ukraine implies a lot of association with Russian ownership, whereas just calling it Ukraine is more of the, it recognizes Ukraine's independence from Russia.
Was that a question or a comment?
David was a comment.
Thank you.
And we do have time for one more dramatic question if anybody has one. Or a simple, gentle question. That's perfectly fine.
Tell us about working on the collected or the selected book, your poetry. I want to hear about that.
I didn't hear that.
Could you talk about working on your selected poetry collection?
It hasn't been uppermost in my mind lately, but thank you for mentioning it, Ariel. And thank you for the article in the Free Press, Ariel. I haven't, I guess it's coming to the surface and I'll talk about it some other time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Do you and Faith have any closing comments you might like to offer?
I would just like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank Faith for the conversation with me, for John for handling everything so well and repeating the questions for me, and for everybody for coming. Thank you ever so much.
I would like to say that this is a wonderful cover and a very appropriate cover.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, both of you. So as mentioned previously, we'll just trouble you to remain in your place for one moment while we transport Sarah to the signing table. I'll let you know when she's good to go there, and then you can come over and have copies of the book signed. We have copies at the table. We have copies at our cash desk as well. Feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Just please do pay for the book at some point this evening. We're enormously grateful to CMU Press for helping to make this evening a possibility, and of course for publishing The Russian Daughter. So round of applause for CMU. And we're so delighted that we could welcome both Faith Johnston behind a microphone again, and also Sarah. I've been launching Sarah's books for years now, and it's always such an enormous pleasure. I look forward to this evening so much. And she also brings out a wonderful group of people. So thank you all for joining us here tonight, both in person and virtually. If you'd like to watch the video, it will remain live on our channel, or if you'd like to share it with someone who was unable to attend. But otherwise, thank you all so very much once again, and please do have a wonderful evening. Have a good night.